Hi, I'm Devin C. Larson and welcome back to the channel. You may notice that my surroundings have changed a little bit. Well, that's because I've moved. So I'm out of the closet and into the blanket fort, or as I like to call it, Killer Voice Studios 2.0. Today I wanted to introduce you to Audacity, which is the recording software that I use in all of my work. You have a variety of options when it comes to recording programs, including Pro Tools, Adobe Audition, even GarageBand, and there are pros and cons to each. However, in my opinion, your best bet is still going to be Audacity. It may not be as fully featured when it comes to music recording and editing as some of those others, but it's going to do everything that you need it to for voiceover. And did I mention that it's free? Because it's free. Go to audacityteam.org to download it. It's an open source program that's updated all the time. Download it, install it, and then fire it up, because today I wanted to introduce you to the interface a little bit. In a future video, I'll get into the nuts and bolts of recording and editing. This is the Audacity interface, and it's more straightforward than it might appear if you've never used an audio interface before, so don't be scared of it. You have your primary toolbar here at the top with your basic controls for pause, play, stop, skip back, skip forward, and record all on this left-hand side. Next is a button that toggles loop selection on and off. And the way that loop selection works is if you select an area of your audio track and click loop selection on, then when you play back, it will loop that part of the track over and over again. Next are the buttons that switch between your various primary controls. You're going to want to leave it most of the time on the selection tool, the one that looks like a cursor. That's going to be your main tool. These others have their uses, but that's going to be the one that you use most of the time. Next, these grayed out buttons are for your zoom controls. They're grayed out because there's nothing to zoom on. But the first two are your standard zoom in and zoom out, the magnifying glasses with the plus and minus. Those are a bit redundant because there's much simpler ways to do that using hotkeys. I'll get into more on that on the recording video. And next to that are buttons for fit selection and fit project to width. These are surprisingly useful. If you're zoomed all the way in and you want to suddenly fit a selection or fit the entire track to your screen, these are what do that. And so you're probably going to find them very useful at specific points. Underneath is the buttons for trim audio and silence audio selection. The temptation is going to be to use silence audio to get rid of any kind of unwanted noises in your audio tracks, but it's going to flatten everything and get rid of all sound. And it's going to sound unnaturally quiet. So there are better ways to do that. Be aware that these exist, but I would steer clear of them. Then you have your buttons for undo and redo. Again, I would recommend that you just use hotkeys. And then you have a button for audio setup. And if you click on it, it toggles a drop-down menu where you can select from your different devices to make sure that you're using the correct microphone, which would be under recording device, and your playback device would be where the sound is coming from. So in this case, under recording device, I have my audio interface because that's where my microphone is plugged in, and my playback device is my speakers that are also routed through my audio interface. You might have headphones, whatever you're using, but all of these options live under this audio setup button now. Share audio is a newer button that apparently lets you upload audio to the cloud, I guess. I don't really use it. And then at the end, you have buttons that let you adjust your recording and playback levels. The recording one's on top with the microphone, playback on the bottom with the bullhorn. And these sliders go from 0% on the left to 100%. I would recommend that you leave both at 100% on the far right. The reason for this is you shouldn't really need to adjust them all that much when you're adjusting your recording level, because most of that's going to be done with the gain knob on your audio interface, and then the playback level would be done with the volume knob on your speaker or your audio interface if you're using headphones. But just know that they're there and know what they do. The 2 meters themselves are measuring the sound level in decibels. And if you want to measure your sound level in real time for recording, right-click on the top meter and hit Start Monitoring. And then, as you can see, it's measuring the volume of my speaking voice in real time, so I can adjust it up or down to get it into the right area. So let's talk really quick about what the different numbers here mean. So this is measuring sound levels in decibels. And decibels are the way that loudness is measured, and they work differently from other types of measurements that you might be familiar with. So usually when you're measuring something, that figure is going to be positive, right? But with decibels, positive is bad. Positive means that the sound is so loud that it's distorting. That's why on the meter it goes from around -60 to 0. And you don't ever want your peak level to be at 0 because that's still going to be too loud. Your peak level is going to be the loudest that it gets, or the highest the waveform gets. You're probably going to want your peak to be around -3. Actually, when you're calibrating, it's probably best for your peak to be around -6, which, as you can see on the interface or on the monitor here, it only ever gets as loud as about -6 because that's where I want it. On the other end, around -60 to about -40, that's your room tone. That's how noisy your recording is if you just turn it on and then don't make any noise. That's the background hum. And then your sweet spot as you're speaking, you want it to sort of be around the -12 to -18 range. So just speak in a normal voice, and if your recording level is too quiet, turn up your gain knob, and if it's too loud, turn it down. And once you get the levels about where you want them, you're going to want to right-click and stop monitoring. So this is the main part of the window. This is open field. That's where your tracks are going to go. We don't have any yet because we haven't created them, but this is where they're going to go. At the top is your timeline that measures the time in seconds, and that'll adjust as you zoom in and out. At the bottom, you have your length of selection, so your start and end and overall duration of whatever area of the track that you've selected. At the far right here is your playback speed. I would leave it at default, which is 1x. You don't want it to play back too fast or too slow. That just isn't helpful. And then the last thing I want to really talk about is your project rate in hertz. You have a lot of options as far as your project rate, and what that is actually about is it's measuring something called the sample rate, and it's how a digital interface like Audacity captures and interprets sound wavelengths. The number is the number of times per second that Audacity samples the sound, and so the higher the number, the more detailed the waveform, the more samples it gets. Although the thing to know is that the higher the number, the exponentially larger the file size gets. The sweet spot for most audio is either going to be 44.1 kilohertz or 48 kilohertz. 44.1 is where I'd recommend that you put it, and that's considered CD standard audio, containing most of the frequencies, or all of the frequencies rather, that are audible to the human ear, and it's probably where you want to keep this setting unless whatever project you're working on specifies otherwise. And lastly, Snap to can just remain off. And that's the basics of the Audacity interface, along with how to set your recording levels. At this point, we're ready to begin recording our voiceover tracks, which is where we'll pick things up next time. Thanks for watching. Make sure you like, subscribe, enable notifications, and if you found this video particularly helpful, pay it forward, tell a friend. Until next time.